3 weeks before my wedding, everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family shattered in a single moment. I had been preparing myself for the happiest day of my life, convinced that all the sleepless nights at the hospital, the double shifts, the missed birthdays, and canceled vacations were finally worth it. I believed I was walking into a future built with the man I loved. But when I pulled into the long driveway of his mother's grand Portland estate, clutching a stack of seating charts for our reception, I was about to discover a betrayal so sharp it sliced deeper than any scalpel I had ever seen. My name is Emily Carter. I am 26 years old, a trauma nurse who grew up in foster care until Caroline Miller took me in as her own. For years, I worked harder than anyone I knew, saving every extra dollar, dreaming of a life I thought I had finally earned. I believed Michael Harris, my fiancé, saw me, not the girl without a family name, not the orphan who had to fight for everything, but me. That belief was about to be ripped apart at its core. I rang the doorbell expecting to find Michael or his mother, Margaret, ready to discuss flower arrangements and guest lists. Instead, the door swung open to reveal a woman I barely recognized, Sophia Grant. She was radiant, dripping elegance, and around her neck glimmered something that froze my blood. My grandmother's pearl necklace, the only piece of her legacy I had, the one Michael had sworn was stolen just weeks earlier. My breath hitched. My fingers tightened around the envelope I carried, still dusted with flour from unpacking Caroline's old recipe box in my new apartment. Behind Sophia, spread across the crystal coffee table, lay the stack of wedding invitations I had hand-addressed, except my name, Emily Carter, had been slashed through in heavy red ink. Above it, in bold, swirling letters, was written Sophia Grant. "Emily," Sophia said with a smile, sharp enough to cut glass. "You came. Good. We have so much to discuss." She stepped aside like she already owned the place. I walked into the same living room I had decorated for Christmas, choosing every throw pillow and garland myself. Now it looked foreign, hostile. Margaret Harris sat stiff in her wingback chair, sipping tea from China she had once told me I wasn't refined enough to touch. Beside her loomed Marcus Grant, Sophia's father, the pharmaceutical kingpin, whose name appeared in half the hospital's wings. Margaret's gaze slid over me like I was a stranger. "This is for the best, Emily. You must see that before I could even breathe a reply, Michael descended the grand staircase, calm as ever in the tailored suit I had bought him for his last promotion. In his hand was a manila folder, thick with documents. He placed it on the table next to the ruined invitations, as if checking off a task on his to-do list. "Everything has been arranged," he said smoothly. "The apartment lease will transfer to my name next week. The movers are scheduled. Your belongings will be placed in storage near Caroline's address. You'll be taken care of." The words slammed into me. My mind raced. Apartment lease? I remembered weeks ago, Michael had slid a paper across the table, saying it was just a routine maintenance form. I'd signed it without reading, tired after a double shift. Now I realized I had signed away my rights. He had planned this betrayal far longer than I'd feared. Margaret's hand pointed to my left ring finger. "The diamond stays in the Harris family," she said coldly. I curled my hand into my purse, trying to shield it. That ring wasn't just jewelry. It was supposed to be the promise of a future. But Michael extended his hand toward me, his voice calm, patronizing. "Emily, please don't make this harder than it has to be." I slid the ring off, my hands trembling, and placed it beside the contract. The click of metal against the table sounded like a judge's gavel sentencing me without appeal. I turned toward the door, spine stiff, vision swimming. Behind me, Michael's voice followed like a knife. "Don't fight this, Emily. You were never meant to belong." The words clung to me as I stepped into the cold Portland night, clutching what little I had left. But deep inside, something darker than grief began to stir. Have you ever had everything you built ripped away in a single night? If you know what it feels like, tell me in the comments, because what I did next wasn't survival. It was the spark of revenge that would change everything. I drove back to the apartment I once called home, headlights cutting through Portland's damp midnight air. When I parked in the garage, I saw them, cardboard boxes stacked neatly in my space. Each one had my name written in Margaret Harris's neat cursive. Emily. Kitchen. Emily. Clothes. Emily. Miscellaneous. My life, 4 years of it, reduced to labeled containers, like I was evidence in a case they had already closed. My chest tightened, my hands shook, but I couldn't cry anymore. Tears had been burned out of me at the mansion. I carried one box upstairs, only to find Michael had already stripped the place of his presence. The shelves were bare, except for my things, carefully packed by strangers. Even the smell of his cologne had gone faint. I sat on the cold hardwood floor, scrolling through apartment listings on my phone. Studio, first and last month's rent up front. Credit check required. Deposits non-refundable. My savings wouldn't cover even a week in one of those places. Every path forward was blocked, just as they had planned. At 3 a.m, I finally called the only person I had left. My thumb hovered over the contact until desperation won. "Caroline," I whispered when she answered. "I can't stay here. I have nowhere." "Sweetheart, I've been waiting for this call," she said gently. "Come home. The kettle's already on." When she opened her front door, the smell of chamomile and lavender rushed out. The guest room was waiting, the quilt freshly washed, a purple toothbrush on the sink. My throat ached as I realized she had prepared for me long before I admitted the truth to myself. For 3 days, I drifted through her house like a ghost. Caroline never pushed for details. She simply sat with me, placed warm mugs of tea in my hands, and reminded me that I had worth. On the 4th morning, she came into my room with a file folder. "There's a position open," she said. "It's unusual, but it pays $18,000 a month, plus housing. 6 months could change your life." I frowned at the number, certain my eyes were playing tricks. 18,000. Triple what I made at the hospital. "What's the catch?" "The patient," Caroline said, her voice careful, "is Jonathan Blackwell, the tech billionaire. He was paralyzed in that ski accident 8 months ago. 4 nurses quit in 2 months. One lasted only 5 days. He's difficult." I remembered his name from the headlines Michael used to read aloud, always with envy. Blackwell, the prodigy who built an empire before 33, a man the grants had been circling like vultures ever since his accident. I should have asked more questions. I should have taken the contract home and read every line. Instead, I walked into Margaret's downtown office the next day, looked into her steel gray eyes, and when she asked why I wanted the job, I told the raw truth. "Because I need to disappear. My life here is over." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. She slid the contract forward. "Mr. Blackwell requires absolute discretion. No visitors. No calls during duty. No discussion of his condition with anyone. Ever. Can you handle that?" I thought of Michael's betrayal, of Sophia's shark smile, of Margaret's handwriting labeling my boxes like I was already buried. I didn't even skim the fine print. My signature scratched across the page before reason could catch up. For a nurse who lived on precision, I signed away my freedom without reading a word. The next evening, I stood in the silent east wing of Jonathan Blackwell's glass fortress, clutching a pager that felt more like a shackle. From the room marked private, I heard the impossible, metal clashing, heavy breathing, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The Blackwell estate loomed like a fortress of glass and steel, rising from the green hills outside Portland. From the moment I stepped into my suite in the East Wing, I felt like I had entered another world. The marble floors gleamed, the windows stretched floor to ceiling, and the silence was so heavy, it pressed against my chest. It should have felt like luxury. Instead, it felt like a cage, lined with velvet. That first night, sleep refused to come. I lay in a bed, too large for one person, staring at the ceiling, my mind circling the humiliation I had just endured. Michael's cold voice, Sophia's smug smile, my grandmother's pearls against another woman's skin. At 2 a.m, I finally gave up, slipped on a sweater, and wandered the silent corridors. That was when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in a house where everyone was asleep. Metallic clinks, uneven, followed by a low grunt. My stomach tightened. I followed the echo down the hall until I reached a door marked Private. The rules Margaret had made me sign raced through my head, no entering unauthorized rooms. But rules hadn't saved me before, had they? I pressed down on the handle. The door gave way with a soft click. The gym beyond glowed in low light. State-of-the-art equipment filled the room, the kind you'd see in a rehabilitation hospital, not a private residence. And there, between 2 parallel bars, was Jonathan Blackwell. His hands gripped the steel so tightly, his knuckles shone white. His legs, the same legs every medical journal said were useless, were trembling as he forced them forward. One step, then another. Agonizing. Uneven, but real. He was standing. My breath caught in my throat. I must have made a sound, because his head snapped up. Storm-gray eyes locked onto mine, burning with fury, and something that looked alarmingly like fear. "Another one," he said, spinning his wheelchair around with startling speed. His voice was sharp as broken glass. "Margaret must be desperate if she's hiring from the bargain bin now." The insult should have cut me, but I had been gutted already. After what Michael and his family did, words couldn't wound me anymore. I stepped forward deliberately, though my knees were shaking. "I'm Emily Carter," I said. "Your new nurse, and I don't scare easy." For a second, surprise flickered across his features. He studied me, like a scientist examining a rare sample. Then his expression hardened again. "You didn't see anything. You will forget this." I shook my head. "Why would you hide progress like this? Do you know how many people would give anything to see you walk?" His voice dropped, low and dangerous, because the moment people see hope, they demand miracles. And when you fall short, they abandon you. Everyone leaves. The words echoed in the vast room, and I felt them like a mirror reflecting my own pain. I wanted to tell him I knew exactly what it meant to be left behind, but before I could, a red light blinked above us. My stomach dropped. In the corner of the ceiling, half hidden by shadow, a tiny camera lens stared back at me, recording, watching. If that footage existed, someone else already knew Jonathan's secret. And if it was Marcus or Sophia, then both Jonathan's empire and my last chance at survival were already hanging by a thread. The mansion felt like an ice palace, every wall of glass reflecting back my own unease. After the scene in the private gym, I expected Jonathan to fire me instantly, to have security drag me out into the night. Instead, he wheeled himself closer, his eyes hard and unblinking, and waited for me to speak. My throat was dry, but I forced the words out. "Your bitterness doesn't scare me." For a long moment, he didn't move. The silence was so heavy, I could hear the faint hum of the thermostat, the rustle of fabric as his hand shifted on the armrest. "Most people run when they see what you saw," he said finally, his voice as cold as the steel beams around us. "Why didn't you?" "Because I knew the answer. It wasn't that I was brave. It was that I had nothing left to lose. Because I know what it's like to be broken," I whispered, "and still fight." The words surprised even me, but I saw the impact they had on him. His jaw tightened, not with anger this time, but with something else, recognition. He leaned forward, studying me as though he could peel away my defenses and see the scars underneath. Then, without another word, he spun his chair around and returned to the window, settling into the role of a man too weak to move. It was theater, a performance he had perfected. I suddenly realized he wasn't the only one who had been living a lie. The next morning, I was still replaying that moment when Margaret appeared at my door, every line of her posture crisp and controlled. "Mr. Blackwell has early visitors today," she said. Her voice was flat, but her eyes flicked to the pager, clipped at my pocket. "Be ready." I followed her through the corridor, the sound of our footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. The air carried the faint scent of polished wood and expensive cologne. When we reached the landing that overlooked the main hall, I froze. A convoy of black sedans had just rolled through the iron gates, their headlights slicing across the marble driveway. The lead car bore a vanity plate I recognized instantly. GRNT001. Sophia emerged first, flawless in a cream-colored suit that shimmered in the morning light. Behind her came Marcus, his presence so heavy it seemed to fill the foyer before he even spoke. And then, as if fate was mocking me, Michael stepped out of the car. He wasn't wearing the suit I had bought for his promotion. No, this was Armani, sleek and sharp, the kind of armor he had once told me was unnecessary extravagance. He carried a leather medical briefcase, the same kind he used at the hospital. My pulse hammered. What was he doing here? Margaret led me quickly toward the service corridor, her face unreadable. But before she closed the door behind me, I caught a glimpse of Michael's hand, resting on the coffee table inside the reception room. Spread before him were thick files, stamped with Jonathan's name in red. Medical records, private records. I had just watched Jonathan stand, with my own eyes. What on earth was Michael about to claim? And why did I feel that the same people who had destroyed me were now circling him, ready to tear apart his world the way they had shredded mine? I carried the silver tray like armor, moving through the servant's door into a room where money dressed itself as civility. Sophia sat with one ankle hooked over the other, smiling the way a cat smiles at a birdcage. Marcus occupied Jonathan's favorite chair without asking, a small violence disguised as comfort. Michael stood near the windows, posture perfect, jaw tight, medical briefcase open like a stage prop. They had come to divide a man the way surgeons divide tissue, except there was no oath here, only appetite. I set cups on coasters, silent, invisible, listening. Marcus spoke first, voice coated in false warmth. He praised Jonathan's courage, then drifted without pause to the reason for his visit: leadership transitions, execution risk, shareholder confidence. On the table, he placed an offer wrapped in courtesy: $18 million for patents that had been valued, even conservatively, at 120. Cash, clean, immediate, he said, like he was offering mercy rather than theft. Jonathan's wheelchair faced the windows. From where I stood, I could see the set of his shoulders, the stillness he used as a weapon. "My condition," he said mildly, "doesn't change the value of my mind." Michael slid a folder forward, eyes avoiding mine, as if my history had evaporated with my ring. He spoke of permanent impairment, plateaued recovery, diminished executive function. He said the words like he had practiced them, each consonant polished until it shone with authority. He wanted to shout that I had watched Jonathan stand. I wanted to tear the file in two, but I poured coffee, steady-handed, and memorized every lie. When Michael reached for the sugar, our fingers almost touched. His gaze flicked up, quick, guilty, then cold, a recognition, an erasure. I was a closed chapter to him, a name already crossed out in red. Sophia leaned toward Jonathan, perfume cutting the air like citrus and steel. "Let us carry this burden for you," she murmured. "You deserve rest." The word rest rolled across the table like a sedative. I thought of the boxes labeled with my name, the lease I had signed away without reading, the pearls at Sophia's throat that used to live against my grandmother's skin. Rest is not what they offered. They offered a quiet burial. I cleared the tray, retreating to the kitchen pass-through, where the sound carried perfectly. Marcus mentioned contingencies, board petitions, an emergency competency review, an accelerated vote. He named dates like threats. He even mentioned a physician's affidavit already prepared should Jonathan resist. Michael confirmed with a nod that made my stomach turn. A lifetime ago, I had trusted those hands with my heart in my future. Now, they were ink on a document designed to cage another man's mind. On my way back through the corridor, my thumb found the thin band hidden in my pocket. The old setting from my grandmother's ring, the one I had. Switch the day, Margaret demanded the family diamond back. I should have revealed it then, should have laid it on Marcus's contracts like a stone of truth. But impulse held me still. Evidence shown too early becomes a warning, not a reckoning. Some truths need the right room to burn. The meeting ended with soft handshakes and hard intentions. Margaret wheeled Jonathan away, her face unreadable, while the Grants drifted toward the foyer as if they owned the dawn. Michael lingered by the window, phone lighting his face. He didn't look back when he left. He never does, I thought. Not when he believes there's a higher floor waiting. When the door shut, the mansion's silence surged back. I stood in it for a long beat, feeling the echo of everything I hadn't said. Then I went to Jonathan's study. He was there already, chair turned from the window, voice low and iron-edged. "Tell me about them," he said. "Tell me every lie he told you, every door they plan to close." I pulled up a chair, placed my palms on the table between us, and began. By the time I finished, we weren't patient and nursey anymore. We were two people who had been measured for coffins by the same hands. The plan didn't announce itself. It arrived the way storms do, pressing against the windows until you realize the sky has already changed. We mapped names and dates, back channels and shell companies. We drew a line from my demolished life straight to theirs and found it ran through him. My anger sharpened into something useful. His fury cooled into strategy. On the desk lay a portfolio with his initials embossed in silver. When I closed it, I realized I had closed a door too. Not on grief, I would carry that a while, but on being anyone's victim. We turned the study into a battlefield, and the mansion into a clock. Mornings were for physical therapy, afternoons for discovery, nights for stitching, both into a single future. Margaret procured access we weren't supposed to have, her expression the same, no matter what key opened which door. Patricia Collins arrived with 3 associates in a briefcase that clicked like a trap when it closed. She spoke in clean edges. "We need proof of intent, a chain of custody for every document, and a reveal that speaks to the heart and the law in the same breath." Jonathan nodded once, then lifted himself to standing with the parallel bars we'd relocated beside the bookshelves. The first time he took 10 steps with a cane, I forgot to breathe. The 20th step came a week later. It broke him open. Sweat ran along his temple. His teeth were clenched so hard, I worried for the enamel. He stumbled on the 22nd and went down hard, shoulder catching the floor with a thud that rattled my bones. Reflex took me to the phone. His hand closed over mine before I could dial. "If you call them, they win," he said through pain. "You know that. Everything in my training rebelled. Everything in our plan agreed." I pressed my palm against his shoulder, breath shaking. We waited for the surge of agony to crest and pass. Later, when I iced the bruising and checked reflexes twice, he met my gaze with a gratitude that didn't soften him. It tempered him. In the hours between, we dug. Patricia's team traced emails back 4 months, older than my engagement's last good memory. Phrases repeated like a rhythm you can't unhear. De-risk, remove obstacles, accelerate transition. We followed company registrations that bloomed in the Caymans, timed to rumors pushed through carefully willing mouths. We found the Whisper campaign seated in investor calls, the draft press release praising a compassionate handover no one had earned. At midnight, I scanned Michael's messages to Sophia, the intimacy of their logistics more obscene than any photograph. He called me emotional overhead. He referred to Jonathan as our wedge. There it was, plain as daylight, how they spoke of lives, mine, Jonathan's, as tools. The humiliation I thought had eaten me hollow instead became fuel. Rage clarified. It didn't cloud. We trained for the boardroom. Not just the walk, though the walk mattered. Power changes when it stands. But the choreography of proof. Which exhibit first? Which audio next? Where to place the compliance memo so a certain director would reach for it instinctively. Patricia drilled us until our answers tightened, then made us loosen them again so they sounded like people telling the truth, not actors reading lines. I dreamed of marble floors and falling, of doors that opened onto rooms filled with boxes labeled with my name. I woke to Caroline texting me a photo of her garden in morning light and a single line. Proud of you, kiddo. I held the phone long after the screen dimmed. Pride is a thin rope until someone else holds the other end. The morning before the meeting, a courier delivered a slim envelope. Inside was a transcript pulled from the mansion's security backbone we hadn't yet explored. A conversation captured in my first week here, when Marcus arrived with that false gentleness. His words lay there, black on white, as if daring us to read them aloud. He's too broken to fight back. The board will side with the living over the wounded. The crippled genius is ripe for harvesting. My hands shook. Jonathan didn't flinch. Good, he said softly. Let them hear themselves. We rehearsed one last time. I placed the portfolio on the table where the chair would be for him. No, not for him. For the figure they'd written in their heads. He took the cane, straightened the jacket, and stood. His breath was steady. Mine matched it. Ready? He asked. Not as a question, but as a recognition. I answered by picking up the keycard that opened the door to a future neither of us intended to run from again. The elevator doors parted onto the executive floor, and the air changed. Money has a temperature, power, a scent. Heads turned as Jonathan advanced one measured step at a time, the cane's tip kissing marble in a slow metronome. People who had been told a story about a broken man watched it unravel in front of them like thread pulled from a seam. I carried the portfolio at his shoulder, not behind, where I used to walk with men who expected me to follow. Inside, the boardroom was staged for coronation that wouldn't come. 12 directors, a city's horizon framed behind them. Marcus had taken the chairman's seat. Sophia glittered beside him, a constellation arranged for cameras that were not invited. Michael sat at the far side. Medical reports fanned like cards in a rigged game. He looked taller than I remembered. He looked small. Conversation faltered when Jonathan crossed the threshold. A collective intake of breath skimmed the room like wind. He didn't hurry. He let their eyes register each step that was supposed to be impossible. At the head of the table, he remained standing just long enough to convert disbelief into silence, then sat with control that felt louder than any speech. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice even, there seems to be confusion about my capacity. He angled his gaze toward Michael without blinking. Doctor? The single word landed like a summons. Michael cleared his throat and began to recite what he had polished. Incomplete lesions. No functional recovery below T6. Executive impairment under stress. It was an opera of certainty, sung off key. I laid Exhibit A on the table. Communications predating any formal consultation. Then B, then C, an ascending scale. Emails with subject lines that sang of strategy and subtraction. Patricia took over when the law needed to speak, delineating violations with the calm of a winter road. Insider trading. HIPAA breaches. Conspiracy to misappropriate intellectual property. She made eye contact only when necessary, and it was always necessary. Marcus gestured at the pile. "This is an interpretive exercise," he said smoothly, "not evidence." Jonathan tapped the tablet we had prepared. The audio filled the room. Marcus's voice, unmistakable, leisurely cruel. "He's too broken to fight back. The board will side with active leadership. The crippled genius is ripe for harvesting." No one coughed. Someone in the middle reached for a glass of water and thought better of it. Sophia's poise fractured first. Her fingers worried the edge of a folder until it bent. Michael tried to speak. Some gambit about context, about intention, about data limitations. I stood then, the old setting of my grandmother's ring warming in my palm, and set it on the table where his papers claimed authority. He recognized it before he let himself know he had. Color rose under his collar. "You gave the family ring back," he said, tiny, automatic. I looked at him the way you look at a stranger who tells you a story about yourself that never happened. "Jonathan," Patricia said softly, "the resolutions." Documents slid forward. 2 outcomes laid flat like parallel tracks. Withdrawal and resignation, or prosecution and headlines. Marcus's pen scratched first, the old predator scenting blood in the water that was his own. Sophia followed, the hand that had rewritten my invitations, now shaking over her own name. Michael hesitated, eyes cutting sideways, at me with an appeal I didn't catch because I wasn't holding a net anymore. He signed. When the door clicked shut behind their retreat, the room exhaled all at once. A director cleared his throat. Another requested a 5-minute recess. They didn't get one. Jonathan anchored both hands on the table, not to rise, but to claim. "We have a company to rebuild," he said. It wasn't bravado. It was gravity returning to its rightful center. He found my hand beneath the table edge, not for rescue. He could stand now without me, but for witness. Some losses are heavy, even when you win. I watched the city through glass that used to reflect me as an outline and saw, for the first time in a long time, a path that didn't end at someone else's door. The ribbon was silver, and the scissors were heavier than they looked. Cameras clicked, even though we hadn't invited the press. News finds a way into rooms where something true is about to happen. The sign behind us read, Blackwell Carter Rehabilitation Center. The hyphen wasn't decoration. It was a promise, an architecture of 2 names that had learned how to hold weight without collapsing. We built it fast and right. 15,000 square feet of dignity, carved into rooms where fluorescent lights didn't hum. Despair, but hummed possibility. Parallel bars that didn't feel like cages. A therapy pool, warm enough for courage. Exam rooms with windows that opened to the hills' soft green. So the world didn't disappear when recovery got hard. We hired clinicians who could count to 10 on a goniometer, and also on a patient's breath when panic threatened. We wrote protocols that treated pain as data and hope as a metric, and we did not apologize for either. Carolyn walked through on opening morning with a clipboard she didn't need, and mist in her eyes that she pretended was from the antiseptic. She had taken the role of director of patient advocacy, like it had been waiting in her pocket all along. Every intake form now had a question she insisted on adding. Who do we call when you forget you're worth the trouble? Patients wrote cousins, pastors, old teachers. Some wrote no one. For those, she wrote her own number. Nathaniel. Jonathan in public. Nathaniel only when the door closed and the city blurred. Stood straighter than the first day he returned to the office. The cane had become punctuation rather than a crutch. He spoke at the podium, not about vengeance, but about velocity, about how a life can be thrown from its orbit and still find a new center if you build the math right. Reporters asked about the coup and the boardroom and the grants. He answered with the names of the first 5 patients on the schedule. Our first arrival was a 22-year-old named Jaime, who had lost more than balance in a motorcycle crash. Her mother brought a bag of fear and a folder of denials from insurance. We didn't ask her to empty either. Instead, Nathaniel showed her a rendering of the neural interface he had refused to sell, the one we kept and refined. I taught her how to listen to her own body again, without expecting betrayal. On day 8, she took 3 steps with the water cupping her ankles and cried into my shoulder, then laughed into it, and I knew we were doing the right work. Word traveled. Not glossy billboard word, but kitchen table word, church basement word, group chat at 2 a.m. word. People came who didn't think they were allowed to ask for more. People came who had been told they were uncooperative when their pain didn't behave. The waiting list hurt to look at. We grew as fast as we could without letting the floorboards creak. A newspaper ran a small item on page 6 about a courthouse wedding. The photo was grainy, but accuracy doesn't require pixels. Sophia wore a simple dress. Michael wore the look of a man who had mistaken height for altitude. Their smiles didn't meet their eyes, and I felt nothing I expected. No satisfaction, no spike of victory. Just the faintest ache for the version of myself who would have built a life with a man who loved what doors she opened for him more than he loved her. That night, after the center quieted and Caroline turned off the lamps that made the hallways feel like home, Nathaniel took me down the service path to the overlook where the city spread in circuitry below. He pulled a small box from his pocket, not velvet, wood, warm from his hand. Inside lay a sapphire set in metal that didn't pretend to be old. "I'm not asking because I need you," he said, voice steady, eyes unguarded. "Need is a poor foundation. I'm asking because choice is a promise I intend to keep. Build this life with me." For a beat, the past flickered. A foyer, a different ring, a different man's certainty. Then, it went dark like a stage after the actors leave. I lifted the ring from its bed and placed it on my own finger. "Yes," I said, not breathless, not afraid. "Yes." A month later, Jaime crossed the length of the therapy room, unaided, while her mother counted every step like a prayer. I watched Nathaniel watch her, pride softening the angles grief had sharpened. My phone buzzed on the counter. An unknown number. I saw his name in the preview, the familiar choreography of sorry, mistake, talk. I didn't open it. I pressed and held until the thread wavered, then slid it into deletion. Some doors don't need to be slammed. They need to be erased. People ask what revenge felt like. It wasn't the signatures on a resolution or the hush when a recording played. It felt like this: a teenager rolling their wheelchair to the edge of a warm pool and deciding to try again. A mother being told she can stop apologizing. My hand in Nathaniel's on a hill above a city that had once watched me be discarded and now watched me choose. Love didn't arrive as consolation. It arrived as structure. And that is how we win, not by returning harm, but by building something so whole the old damage has nowhere to live.